So I was reading this book called Religion for Atheists by Alain de Botton. He's a British author, thinker, kind of an interesting guy. I've been putting this one off. This has been in the book reviews and stuff like that. The title kind of was off-putting to me, so I didn't really like the title. It didn't grab me. But I read enough stuff about the book that made me think I should read it, so I did read it. And, I'm not sure I give it a 2 thumbs up, but there's stuff in here that was thought-provoking for me. And I'm going to share a couple of those things with you. One of them was here, where he's talking about back when the skeptics and the atheists began their assault on religion during the time of the Enlightenment, during the 18th century. He noted that they did so primarily through writing books. And he said, although these skeptics proved to be caustically entertaining critics of the faiths, they failed to appreciate the fundamental difference between themselves and their enemies. The latter were not relying primarily on the publication of books to achieve their impact. They were employing institutions, marshaling enormous agglomerations of people to act in concert upon the world through works of art, buildings, schools, uniforms, logos, rituals, monuments, and calendars. While laying out, and I should add that Alain de Botton himself is an atheist, and his point is that atheists have a lot to learn from religion, even though freethinkers have rejected the theological claims of religion. And he says, while laying out ideas in books, which might sell anywhere from a few hundred copies to a few 100,000 at very best, may seem a noble enough ambition, the medium itself claims a dispiritingly meager reach compared to the wide-ranging influence which institutions can wield in development and perpetuation of attitudes and behaviors. He says, in other words, writing books can't be enough if one wishes to change the world or change things. Thinkers must learn to master the power of institutions for their ideas to have any chance of achieving a pervasive influence on the world. I thought that made me think. It's like, yeah, books can only take you so far, but beyond that, something else has to be at work. And I think it's still, and although he was talking about initially the Enlightenment people who critique religion, I think it's still an apt description of the situation today. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, Harris, Hitchens, Dawkins, and Dennett, did a thorough job in their bestsellers of dismantling the theological claims of religion. Really, between all 4 of the books they wrote, they thought of like every possible argument. I mean, I can't think of anything to add to what they wrote. But religion didn't wither and die. I mean, yeah, religiosity seems to be going down, gradually in the United States. But apparently the work of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse really had very little impact on thriving megachurches like Lakewood or Saddleback or Willow Creek or the Potter's House or any number of other megachurches around. Why? And I guess I'm thinking because the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, all of them wrote books, and not one of them created an institution, for one. And then secondly, religion persists because it meets real human needs on a daily basis, both the needs of people within the community and the needs outside the community. In the New York Times a few weeks ago, they had an interesting article about how the Mormons are making inroads among the Navajo in Arizona and New Mexico. And it started with an outreach project 4 years ago where they went in and were offering to teach people basic home gardening techniques, and they could build, have these kind of plots where they would help, they'd be more self-sustaining when it comes to food. The project started 4 years ago with 25 gardens, and today has over 1,800 gardens in 4 years. They're meeting a real need. Now, a typical freethinker response might be, well, that's just bait and switch, and all they're interested in is converting them to their theology. But the problem with that is, A, you can never impute motives to any human being ever. We don't know what's, there might be some genuine compassion at work there, you don't know. And even if it really is a bait and switch tactic, at least they're out there doing something. And I think that's one reason why I feel good about the track that we are on in our secular community, because as Lou alluded to, we have been out there doing something. Volunteers showing up in good numbers for events and projects that are making a difference in the world. And I know that that's just going to continue, because that seems to be something that draws us together and energizes us. And we're not just sitting around talking about humanism, we're actually out there doing it. So there's much more to humanism than debunking religion. A few weeks ago in a community moment, Sarah Krasleski said it very well when she said, I love this line, well, like Carl Sagan is great and everything, but he can't find me a babysitter. Yeah. See, the point is, and I think she's right, after the theological claims of religion have been dismantled, real human needs remain. Like, where will I find a babysitter who may not be tempted to say grace with my children before they eat? Or who's going to drive me to the medical exam when I can't drive myself? Who am I going to call at 3 in the morning when there's a pressing life need? Any number of real human needs that can be easily addressed in the context of community. Another gleaning I got from this, and this is related from de Botton's book, Religion for Atheists, was he was talking about the Virgin Mary, for example. In fact, this chapter is under what's called tenderness. From a robustly rational perspective, devotion to Mary seems to exemplify religion at its most infantile and soft-headed. How could any reasonable adult trust in the existence of a woman who lived several thousand years ago, if she ever lived at all, much less draw comfort from a projected belief in her unblemished heart, her selfless sympathy, and her limitless patience? The drift of the question is hard to refute. It is simply the wrong question to raise. And this is what got me. The opposite point is not whether the Virgin exists, but what it tells us about human nature that so many Christians over 2 millennia have felt the need to invent her. Our focus should be on what the Virgin Mary reveals about our emotional requirements, and in particular, what becomes of these demands when we lose our faith. And that really struck me. What is it about human nature that necessitated creating her? What does she speak to in the human experience? And after I read these words, I was at a couple of Vietnamese restaurants, and a lot of the Vietnamese restaurants in town, you're going to see an icon of the Virgin Mary. You'll see a large icon, you'll see a statue, maybe a little shrine, clearly playing a role in the lives of the people there. And that book really changed the way I'm approaching that now. In the past, I would have been like, this is like, of all the things that don't have historic basis in the faith, this is one of the ones that has the least, possible historic basis at all. And how could anyone believe this? And now, that's got me thinking, what is it about this that speaks to their needs and their heart? And I can understand, maybe, you came from a country that suffered a horrible war with 2 million casualties, and you came across the ocean to a new country, and you survived, and maybe there is something about that tenderness and that compassion and that limitless patience represented by the Virgin that speaks, and we cannot belittle that. And I'm going to start doing that now. When I see a religious belief or practice that I don't understand, I'm going to ask that question. What is it about human nature that necessitates, not that we're going to rush out, you know what I mean? It's not that I'm going to change my free thought stance at all, but approach it from an anthropological perspective. Getting back to the Navajo and the Mormons for a moment, it turns out that Mormon theology has played a role in their success there among the Navajo. Because in the Book of Mormon, American Indians play a significant role, a central role in the salvation history of Mormon, theology. And it's not true of any other Christian denomination that I know of. And one of the Navajo converts, a man in his 50s, was quoted in the article as saying, "Here was an outside group of people telling me that I wasn't just someone who was poor, that I had a great heritage and a great potential. Bingo. There was someone from outside who believed in him and his people, and apparently that trumped the other stuff." It's like, yeah, I'll sign up, even though maybe the theology doesn't make sense. But you see, they found a way to validate an essential human need. Yeah, all people need to feel like they're more than poor and don't matter. People need validation. They need to know there's potential. They need to, know there are people that care. The well-known harsh critics of religion, the celebrity atheists, have certainly raised the profile of the free thought movement and made a huge contribution, no doubt. But in the battle for hearts and minds, hearts are even more important than minds, I think. And you may disagree, and we can talk about it later. But, it's okay to be Mr. Smarty Pants, but Mr. Smarty Pants tends not to have a lot of friends. And if for secular humanism to go mainstream, I saw the crowd rushing the field last night at the end of the Auburn-Alabama game, and everybody needs to congratulate Jared wherever he is, wearing his Auburn shirt. I looked at that crowd and I kind of thought, wow, they're in the heart of Alabama. There's a lot of Christians on that field, a lot of Baptists, a lot of Pentecostals, maybe a few Catholics. And wouldn't it be great someday to look at that field and know that in that mix, there's a few thousand humanists rushing the field, Well, if we're going to go mainstream so that we have a significant number of people who could rush the field at the end of the game, I think we need to cultivate the compassion in humanism. And last week, and I wish Dennis were here today, Dennis gave a wonderful talk about the joy of humanism. And we had this conversation afterwards where he invited people to put up key words that represented their values, their humanistic values. And we had equality and dignity and care for the environment, all kinds of wonderful things put up here. And somebody finally mentioned love. It was the last word to go up on the board. And when that word was mentioned, there was an audible response from the crowd. Like, oh, yeah. It was the only word that generated this kind of, emotional, verbal, audible response from the gang, more than any other answer. And I've been kind of thinking about that this week because, people in religion talk about love a lot. You'll hear it mentioned at every religious service, right? Every week. Love your neighbor as yourself. Faith, hope, and love abide these three. The greatest of these is love, and stuff like that. Religion is not afraid of the word love. And yet I can read through entire humanist publications, which are excellent publications with great ideas, but not see the word love appear once. Love is the most powerful emotion, motivating force known to humanity. Love of family, love of community, love of children, love of country, romantic love. You just go on and on. Love of pets. And just because we rationalists know that love is just a neurochemical reaction in our heads, it doesn't make it any less real, any less palpable, any less powerful or important. Love is the reason why most of us, at some level, get up every morning. And we also know that while religion talks a lot about love, even unconditional love, it rarely delivers the goods. If you're a divorced Catholic, a gay Pentecostal, a drinking Baptist, a cohabitating evangelical, a financially struggling member of a prosperity gospel church, you find out pretty quickly that the unconditional love has a few conditions attached to it. Communities like Oasis have been described as a secular alternative to church. I now realize that that description undersells the potential of what could happen. Because if we get this right, we could quite possibly create an experience that trans anything religion was ever able to do. We could finally succeed in offering what religion so often promised but could never really deliver: a community of genuine acceptance, of compassion, and yes, even humanist love. And I think we ought to embrace the word and not be afraid of it, because that is a core value too, and it's too important a word to let others monopolize it. I want to circle back in closing to that notion of an institution. The Debatten talks about the power of an institution versus books, and this is the seeds of an institution here. When we are offering weekly meetings, programming, we're involved with each other, involved in the world, and we see this growing. So several years ago, they built a new Roman Catholic cathedral in Los Angeles. And there was an interview where there was some prominent architect. He was not actually a Catholic architect, but they hired some top-notch, well-known architect who designed the building. And he said in this interview in the paper, when they commissioned him to do this, they told him to design a building that would last for at least 500 years. Wow. I don't like the message, but I admire the audacity. And I think we need a similar audacious vision of something that might last 500 years at some level. Those are my thoughts today.